Check, check, check. All right. Unable to connect to chat. What the? Let's see. Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm going a dual broadcast here on Twitter and not Twitter, YouTube and Instagram with our full moon tarot divination. Full moon is tomorrow, first thing in the morning. So we'll be feeling all of those full moon vibes, getting a very, very, very intense overnight. It says that I can't chat on YouTube, which is super duper whack. And I don't know why, but I don't know. Try to send me a message on YouTube and see if it'll let you send. Welcome to your live chat, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it says unable to connect. Please try again later. I don't really know what they want me to do. Do they want me to stop my broadcast? Which is not going to happen. Anyways, I have some terrible news, y'all. I cannot find my golden thread tarot deck. It is inside of a bag that I used a week and a half ago when I was doing in-person tarot readings at Haji Healing Salon. And now I cannot find that deck. I'm devastated. I am hurt. I'm distraught. I'm very attached to that deck because I just feel like it is so poignant for doing these full moon divinations. Luckily, I own more than one tarot deck. And so I am going to use my Radiant Tarot, which is like my personal, everyday, personal practice deck. And I'm going to use that. And I'm going to do what we did before. Hi, Alyssa. Hey, Britt. And draw some cards from the Dust to Onyx Tarot deck. So, if you're just joining me today, we're doing the full moon tarot divination in which the full moon is tomorrow, first thing in the morning. And I've got two cameras going here, so I'm trying to look at both at the same time, but I can't. So I want to spend the first part of this video talking about some astrology. Hi, Free Self Creations. I want to spend the first part of this this video talking about some of the astrology of this full moon. And then I will be pulling some cards, and I'm probably going to be shuffling while I talk. I'm so mad. I'm buying a new tarot deck today, and I already know which one I'm going to get. So this is just a trick of the universe to get me to buy a new deck. But I already know what I'm going to get. So here we are. So this is a full moon in Capricorn. I've been thinking a lot about the astrology of 2020 because I create guides and content for you that I plan well out in advance. For example, the 2020 Sidereal astrology guide is already in the works of being put together. I've been tying together the big picture themes, connecting it to years past and things that are happening now. And from what I've been studying and understanding about the astrology of 2020 is that this moment right now is extremely significant to the astrology of 2020. If you have been following my work for a while, you will know that in 2018, it was really the year of cardinal signs focusing on our Capricorn house. And there was so much energy culminating in our Capricorn house. I used words like sobriety, transactional, this idea of a meritocracy, resourcefulness, earning and deserving, this idea of investing, really being able to soberly assess the limits of the world and conforming our being and our actions to these limits that we perceive, understanding and accepting that there are things we don't know and cannot see, and figuring out how that even fits into our capacity to act in our lives and the world. So this moment at the full moon in Capricorn is so important because once we get into 2020, January presents this really dramatic shift. And it's dramatic because we go from this bombastic stellium in Sagittarius at the end of December 2019 into January 2020, where we have a new moon total solar eclipse that has the sun, moon, south node, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury all in Sagittarius. Folks, I've looked at charts over the past 200 years and there is no precedent for this. There is no precedent for this massive amount of planets in Sagittarius, which means that in your life, there is no precedent for this moment that we are culminating at the end of 2020. So this shift we've experienced from, I would say, May and June into July is mirroring or going to serve as like a ping back, an echo to January of 2020. This full moon being the primary pivot point that bridges the gaps between 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Okay? So 2020, January 2020, the year starts off with this big stellium on the heels of this eclipse in Sagittarius. We have a full moon eclipse in Gemini, and bam, just like that, Saturn leaves Sagittarius. Saturn has been in Sagittarius since January 2017. So this question of making our lives, our work, our bodies, our relationships, this world, our careers, all of these things a living testimony of our intentions and convictions. This idea that our actions say something about our identity. Our actions say something about the story we want to tell about who we are, the impact that we have on the world around us, the way that we interpret our experiences and the impact that that has on our identity. That is the story of 2019, my friends, that started in January of 2017. As we move and get closer to December into January, this Sagittarius story just swells and swells and swells. This idea of protest. Protest meaning that I must publicly make known this truth about how I perceive the world and what this world says about who I am. We shift come January 23rd, 2020. Saturn leaves Sagittarius and it will not come back for another 30 years. And oh, thank you, Cocktail Twin. We leave Sagittarius and this conversation of why, this conversation of considering what the world and how we move in it says about our identity. What does your career say about who you are? What do your relationships say about your identity, your intentions and convictions? What story are you so wrapped up in telling that you feel compelled to act and make this world move in response to your being and identity? Capricorn does not care. I did a video a while back where I was talking about the naivety that Saturn transits and that Capricorn bring to us. This really murder of identity, not identity, of naivety. This sense that not knowing is not an excuse that keeps you from the repercussions of being alive. You may not have a concept of death. You may not even know what death is like, but you're going to die, right? There are limits that there are limits. Hold on a second, I might have to change this. There are limits that we face in the world: time, physical energy, money. There are limits in the amount of water that we have. There are limits in the amount of clean air. There are limits that our bodies can take in temperature, right? There are limits that our structures can take in extreme weather and water. There are limits to the lifespan of our infrastructure, our pipes, our roads, our electrical lines. There are limits to oil and gas. These are real limits. And to think that your wealth, your whiteness, your Americanness, your maleness will protect you from the inevitable of death, of limitations and resources, right? Is foolish. but also to understand that it is the deep awareness of mortality and limits that makes people act crazy, right? So here we are at this full moon in Capricorn that echoes directly back to July of 2018. It echoes directly back to January and February of 2018. It echoes directly back to November of 2016. So just think about those moments. Don't think about your birth chart. Don't think about the houses. Don't think about the signs or planets. Just think about those moments. What do those moments say about your present? What transpired, took place, took root at those moments in your life that you are feeling a direct connection and consequence of right now? And be thinking about 2020. What is the goal that you have? How are you coming to terms with real limits? How are you learning to deal with the fact that your body has needs and there are a limited amount of resources available to meet those needs? Capricorn talks to us about sobriety. And sobriety is about, I don't care what you should do. I don't even care why. It's the ability to say, I have $5. And this is what I'm going to do with $5. Now, this Sagittarius year is important. Sagittarius year of 2019, culminating in December of 2019, is important because we must be asking these questions. Why is there only $5? Why is there a limit in the amount of clean air? Why is there a limit in the amount of money allocated towards the things that we feel are important to us? Bye. Hold on. You cannot interrupt me. I told you. Go play your something else. I don't know. Okay, I don't know what to tell you. So, as we come into this culmination of the end of this year into January 2020, we're asking these questions about why there are these limits. Who decided that there was this much to allocate to this much money to allocate to that? What is the reason for the limits? Why? What convictions? Right? What beliefs? It is so important at this moment as we transition through these peaks of Sagittarius into Capricorn. Your lack of awareness and your inability to be honest about your own intentions is being weaponized against you. I'm going to say that again. Your lack of awareness and inability to articulate and be brutally honest about your own intentions are being weaponized against you. Okay? And so it is deeply important that we take stock and be honest about the stories we tell about who we are. What is the story you tell about who you are? It is so life or death important that you be honest about that story. Otherwise, your impulses lead you, and the wiser and clever, right, they use that against you. You didn't watch, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say. If you did not watch The Great American Hack, you need to watch that to understand. Okay, so in that movie, and some of you may already know this, but in that documentary, they talked about how Cambridge Analytica used these psychological tests in order to aggregate data and make profiles of people, right? So they used your desire and urge to be validated against you, right? You take those tests because you want to learn something about yourself. You want to, you want a label to fit into. You want an identity to cloak onto you. And so in these moments where we're making these transitions, it's important to ask yourself questions and to use tools like astrology, divination, and spirituality, not to shore up the identity that you are invested in telling. It's called The Great American Hack. It's on Netflix. But it's important for you to deconstruct the narratives that you hinge your identity on. So with that being said, this full moon in Capricorn is triggering the Mercury retrograde that we are exiting. It goes out with a bang. This full moon in Capricorn is triggering the full moon eclipse that was conjunct Mars in Capricorn July 27th, 2018. So think about the ways that you are soberly becoming aware of your limitations. Think about the ways that your identity keeps you from really being real and honest. And when I say identity, I mean the story you believe about who you are. Identity is a belief system, right? It's just a story you tell and a story you believe, and it informs the way you interpret other people, and it informs the way you interpret your world. Your perceptions and judgments of the world around you say more about you than it does about the actual world around you. So there's so much going on astrologically, but we're wrapping up this story around home, around belonging, around our immediate needs, and coming to terms with the real limits that we face in the world around meeting those needs and the things that we just have to deal with in order to do that. But don't forget that the story you tell is really up for interpretation as long as you're not so deeply emotionally invested in maintaining a story that's not true. So I'm going to start by shuffling these cards just a little bit more, and then I'm going to cut the deck, and the card on the bottom is going to serve as our significator for this reading, meaning it is going to offer us context and language on how to understand the rest of the cards. This is just the Radiant Rider-Waite Coleman Smith Tarot deck today. I can't find my golden thread, so sorry I don't have my pretty cards. But these will do. All right. I'm going to shuffle one more time and cut the deck and see what we're dealing with at this full moon in Capricorn. Card on the bottom is the Chariot. The Chariot is all about reining in our impulses. There is internal resistance that we feel in moments where you don't feel like doing it, but you must. What is the source of the resolve you find in order to complete things that feel impossible or undesirable? How are you reconciling inner emotional conflicts that that create resistance around accepting certain realities in your life? The Chariot in some systems is associated with Cancer. I don't really buy that. I don't think that's the case. I don't know if I would make a astrological correlation to this card. Maybe I would call it like Mars in Cancer, but not actually the sign Cancer. Mars is in Cancer right now, but my point being that the Chariot highlights and illuminates internal emotional conflict, the conflict between certain needs, right? There is a maturity required to be honest about which needs are the most important. Only children say, I need a candy bar, right? Only children use the language of need in a way to say that the desire inside of them feels like they can't resist it, right? But as adults, we know that need means, can you live without it? Can you thrive without it? Can you survive without it? And those are really three different things. These are three different layers we have. Surviving is life or death. Are you going to die? Right? You need that. Right? But when we get to a place culturally and personally where those basic survival needs are met, now we're asking questions about thriving. Can I thrive without it? And thriving requires other people. Thriving only occurs in the context of relationship and community. And so intuitively, I'm really just feeling this inner dialogue, this inner emotional conflict that we are collectively and individually working through around our basic needs and prioritizing them. What is the relationship between your need for independence and autonomy versus your need for food and shelter? What is the difference between, or what is the tension, the conflict between your need for emotional connection and touch and pleasure versus your need for long term emotional security? And how are we reconciling these disparate or seemingly disparate emotional needs or inner needs that we have? And how do we push through? How do we push through and do what we have to do, though we don't want to? Okay. One of the other things that the chariot often signifies is inevitable success or inevitable completion, meaning that you're going to get through this particular thing, but it's going to be hard. And you're going to have to constantly be mindful of the inner emotional environment as you move through. That really there's an impulse to allow maybe the petulant toddler in you to determine the way that you act and your choices, even though you know that you have to do the grown up thing. You have to take an L, right? And that L means doing something that is not your first choice or doing something that you've previously committed to, even though you're not feeling it. This is adulthood, right? And this is the naivety that Cancer talks about. Not Cancer, Capricorn talks about murdering. That's such a dramatic word, but that's the naivety that Capricorn frees us from. The naivety that we only do things that we want to do when we want to do them. Can you imagine? How would children ever survive if parents said, how would there be a human race if parents said, you know what? I'm only going to do what I want to do when I want to do it, right? We think of obligation as a bad word. And for me, obligation is a necessity for any functioning society. Obligations means I am willing to honor my commitment, even when my emotions are not in alignment with it. So what commitments are you honoring even though you don't feel like it, even though you don't want to? And what success can come when you continue to push forward, honoring your word, your obligations and commitments, even when you don't feel like it? And in what ways has your negative connotations with obligation kept you from success, kept you from your goals? How can you change your relationship with obligation in order to make it a tool that works for you? A tool that says, this goal I'm setting in sober mind, and that I'm willing to commit to this goal, this relationship, this job, this opportunity, even when, and especially when I don't feel like it. That my emotions are valid and my feelings are valid, but I don't have to act on them in order for them to be valid. And that's what the Chariot says. You do not have to act on your feelings in order for them to be valid. You can honor your feelings, you can hold space for them, right? But you don't have to act on them. You've got another goal in mind. What's that other goal? All right. So we're going to start with 3 cards. We've got the King of Wands. This card has been showing up so much, man. We've got the 7 of Cups. And we've got the Queen of Wands. Ooh, look at that pair. Look at that pair. Look at that pair. King of Wands, 7 of Cups, and Queen of Wands. There's a system of reading tarot cards called Elemental Dignities, which looks at the relationship between 3 card triads. And it looks at the elemental relationships of 3 card triads in order to give more insight in which aspects of a particular card are prominent. So when I see the King of Wands and the Queen of Wands flanking the 7 of Cups, I see water flanking fire. And so I see, just as an overall narrative, not even reading the specifics of these cards yet, I see the overall narrative talking about the way that your intentions, your will, and your authority over yourself and your life can help you overcome ambivalence. Okay, so let's unpack ambivalence in the 7 of Cups. Ambivalence is a double mind. It's reiterating and giving us more information about the Chariot, which talks to us about this double mind or this dual emotional circumstance that this inner resistance that makes it difficult for us to move forward, but that we must push through anyways. Ambivalence talks about certain inner conflicts, needs, fears that we have yet to articulate that keep us from fully committing. And just merely in acknowledging, giving space, and holding space for those fears, for those doubts, we are doing the work. We are doing the work of inner emotional reconciliation. So I see the Chariot, I see the King of Wands and the Queen of Wands as this moment of finally having the gall and the wherewithal to overcome inner emotional resistance and ambivalence. Now, I tweeted about this a little while ago, maybe last week, when I was talking about how this Cancer stellium that began in June really forced us to set some of our longer term ambitions and goals on the back burner while we were forced to deal with the immediate needs of our physical body, whether that was food, safety, shelter, or belonging. We were forced to focus on our most immediate relationships. We were forced to focus on and listen attentively to our bodies in ways that might have been jarring because the dissociation that we might have as a natural relationship with our body, meaning we disconnect from the feeling, we objectify our body, we think about our feelings, we talk about our feelings, but we don't feel them, and we don't allow them to really guide us into making decisions that are the best for our bodies. So we have been focused on that in a way that made it necessary to set some longer term ambitions on the back burner. And there is a frustration associated with needing to just rest. There is a frustration associated with, wow, maybe this little pain or this issue that I've been having is indicative of something larger, and maybe I should get that checked out. Because the fear of getting that checked out can make you really change your long term goals and ambitions. Your body is really, oh man. Ooh, I love it when I get these like little messages before my reading, because it's just like so relevant before I even know it. So let me just read this thing to you real quick. Hold on. Saved web pages. And come on. Okay, this quote says, if it's going to show it to me. It's time for a new phone, people. Okay. Um, okay. Okay, the brain does not simply represent the world in a disembodied way as an intellectual construct. Our mind is body bound. We think, feel, and act with our body in the world. All experience is embedded in this body related being in the world. And I haven't read this full article yet, but I saved it because that quote was just so relevant. And this quote comes from Brain Picking's Altered State of Consciousness, and the article is by Maria Popova. So, this idea of the mind being body bound, the impulse that we have to subdue our body to our will, to subdue our body to our intellect, and to subdue our body to the material reality of the world around us, never overrides the fact that our will, our intellect, and even the world around us and the way we perceive it is body bound and body experienced. And so we've really had to honor the body and say that there are needs that my body has, and that in order to even get to these longer term ambitions, I must honor my body. Okay? So let's get to the specifics of these cards. King of Wands versus Queen of Wands. I love this because it's always a teachable moment. Kings are externally focused. They consume and they dissect. That means they go out and acquire and they break things up into pieces, right? They conform the external world to their will, to their element. They use their element to enforce or impose on the external world. The King of Wands is using its will, its strength, its intention, and its capability, its authority to impose change on the external world. I keep mixing that up. To impose change on the external world. The Queen of Wands, queens conserve and cultivate. The Queen of Wands is conserving the will and it's cultivating the will. I really think of the Queen of Wands as the epitome of self-determination, right? Self-possession. This idea that my body, my identity, my will is subject to me. And that anytime that I submit myself to an authority outside of me, this is just me choosing to do that. There is no inherent hierarchy, right? So we see the King and the Queen of Wands as a pair, as this transition, really, from being externally focused to being internally focused, from focusing on the changes that our will can impact on the world around us versus changes in the perception of our identity based on working out internal conflicts. So, what internal conflicts have you been working out that have made changes in your self-perception and identity? What realities of your physical body have caused you to have a shift in how you even understand and perceive yourself, which fundamentally changes how you show up in the world? Okay, I'm gonna leave that there and draw some more cards. All right, we've got the Six of Wands. Ooh, look at all of this fire. The Ten of Wands. Good Lord. Don't give me another Wands card, thank you. And Temperance. We've got a lot of Wands here. And this is really interesting. One of the things I forgot to mention was that at this full moon, Mars is conjunct the August 21st, 2017 eclipse degree. And Mars is leading the way into the next stellium, which is important because just as soon as this full moon is over, both the Venus and the Sun respectively enter Leo, and we're on to our next stellium. So all of this fire is so important. We've got the Six of Wands, Ten of Wands, and Temperance. The Ten of Wands and Temperance is such a logical and natural sequence. The Ten of Wands is the card of overwhelm, the card of taking on too much, being burdened and tired, being physically sick or ill. The Ten of Wands is about, you really taking on more than you can handle, and having reached your physical limit, but also in some ways understanding the limits of the will. So going back to the Chariot, right? We talked about reconciling these inner emotional conflicts as being necessary for realizing ambitions, making peace with obligations as a means to staying the course when we don't feel like it. And so the Ten of Wands and Temperance really speak to temperance, really speak to moderation, right? This idea that you cannot make too much of a thing. One of the ways temperance frequently shows up for me in my work is around taking one singular little emotional experience and making it indicative of some larger story or reality. And so temperance always warns us against, don't let this one little feeling that you're having in this morning tell the complete story about who you are and what's happening in your life. And so the Ten of Wands and Temperance is this phrase that's been coming up recently. I feel like I might have mentioned it in a previous tarot divination, but this idea of be not weary in your well-doing, right? Meaning your fatigue and tiredness is not necessarily an indication of it being wrong. And so what I'm hearing and seeing with the Ten of Wands and the Temperance card is I'm imagining a story around where you take a singular feeling or emotional response, and you allow that to tell the story completely about what you're capable of. Um, you make your feeling evidence of some truth or reality. When in reality, you can choose to interpret that feeling another way, right? So the Six of Wands comes before the Ten of Wands. And the Six of Wands speaks to us about successful use of our will. It speaks to us about, it speaks to us about our, it speaks to us about our will having our will, our intentions, our actions having the intended outcome. The success that comes with knowing that I'm going to do this thing and then this is what's going to happen. The Six of Wands and the King of Wands speak to us about entitlement. And entitlement says that I have the gall and the audacity to take an action because I know that when I take this action, this is the outcome, right? I have the gall and the audacity to perceive and judge the world this way because I trust my own judgment. How I see it is how it is. The actions that I take have this outcome and this is what they mean. The opposite of that is dissociating from your own perceptions and judgments and disconnecting from them to the point that you're constantly separating yourself from your will and observing the will from a distance and choosing to perceive or judge it in a way that's not innate to your own perception and judgment, seeking more information, seeking the opinions and validation of other people, which is not a bad thing. But this reading is really talking to us about the limits of our own perception and judgment. It's talking to us about the limits of our physical capability, but understanding that even within those limits, it doesn't tell the whole story. So at this full moon, we are being reminded to temper ourselves, temper our judgments, and not jump to emotional conclusions about what our feelings mean, right? Don't tell a whole story about what's happening just because of how you feel, right? That there is another way to perceive and judge it. And that if you are in alignment with your intention, meaning that you allow yourself to have a healthy relationship with obligation to your own intentions, then you don't have to tell a new story. You can let that feeling come, you can hold space for it, you can honor it, and not let it deter you from your trajectory. If you're just tuning in, I'm dual broadcasting on Instagram and YouTube. So the YouTube video will be up if you have to leave or if you missed this one. All right. This reading really circles back around in some way. The next cards are the Fool, the Two of Swords, and the Three of Wands. There are so many wands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 9 cards laid here, not including the card on the bottom. Wands are intention of the will, authority of the will, strength and capability and force and power of the will. Some of the language that's coming to me is around this idea of subduing the world with our will, subduing our bodies with our will, subduing our even intellect with the will. So the Fool is about risk taking. It's about adventure. I love when the Fool card comes up in my daily tarot reads because it always means that, you know what, I'm just going to go where this road takes me. Wherever this road takes me is where I'm going to go. There's a freedom and liberation that comes with not having to control. There is a new sense of purpose that comes with being vigilant about watching the road unfold in front of you rather than imposing on your path an idea of what it should be. So, temperance and then the Fool. 6 of Wands, 10 of Wands, temperance, and then the Fool, and then the Two of Swords. There is a story here about pulling back, about what's the word I'm looking for? The visual that I get is of watching something so intently and being so overbearing to making sure that your actions have this particular intended outcome. But the Fool often talks to us about faith. And the two other cards that I associate with that are actually the Eight of Swords and the Hanged Man, which really seems so different from the Fool. But there's a connection there in that the Eight of Swords, the Hanged Man, and the Fool all speak to us about the limits of logic, the limits of our knowledge and knowing, and the limits of the will. Hi, B. Wallman. I think you're Brittany. um, the limits of what our will can actually make happen in the world around us, the limits of our logic and our ability to make sense of the world, and the limit of our intellect, our ability to actually know. And so the Fool includes all of that and leads us to a conceptualization of faith that says that I am willing to accept that sometimes my actions can have outcomes that I did not intend, right? That I can do something without full awareness of what might happen, and something good actually might happen. That I cannot know and perceive a possibility and it still come to pass. I cannot understand how and why something works and it still works. Do you see where I'm going with this? This sense that there are true limits to the will. You cannot force things to happen all the time. Sometimes, especially after we are, have been in this Cancer stellium, sometimes you just got to go back and be like, you know what? I need to rest. I need to listen to my body. I need to recharge. I need to reset my relationship with my body. I need to be tender to myself. I need to honor, to give its due, to pay attention, to hold my body in reverence. Because I cannot even have a will without a body, right? So the Fool is really speaking to us about this moment we're collectively arriving at and personally arriving at around understanding and accepting the possibility that things can happen without your direct influence. One of the things that's so fun for me is when I'm doing a reading with a client and we get to the portion where we're talking about prediction and timing. And I'll say, yeah, it looks like some person may play this role in bringing this particular thing to happen. And so my client gets all up in a fuzzy, well, I don't know nobody like that. And what do I, and it's like, look, you don't have to do anything. This life thing is happening with or without you. I'm telling you this information to give you a sense of peace and to help you get into more alignment with the time and season in your life. And so this Fool is just a reminder of that, is that things are going to happen without you making them happen. So be open to the adventure. Have faith, meaning accept the reality that you don't know everything. Accept that the reality that your physical body, your physical will actually has real limits. And in embracing that, it's like you take your mind and your hand off of it and you really can let that thing grow. The Two of Swords is again another perfect pair and logical card to follow the Fool. The Two of Swords is about withholding judgment, about being able to say, you know what, I actually don't have enough knowledge or information to have an informed opinion about this thing. I actually don't have enough information, whether that is about my internal disposition, about my desire, about my understanding of the world around me, to really be able to say this is what it is. So the Fool, the Two of Swords, and the Three of Wands bring us to this point. And this is where I'm going to pull out these other cards. It brings us to this point where we can really say that that after having really reset our relationship with our body, we're really in a better position to mind our obligations. Going back to that Chariot And going back to the Chariot, that was the card on the bottom when we cut the deck, is, this is my recap here, is telling this story of the inner emotional resistance and conflicts that we deal with in order to mind our obligations and in order to realize our ambitions. If you don't get anything from this reading today, I want you to consider changing your relationship with the word obligation. I want you to consider that obligation means a container and safety net to keep you on the path of righteousness, keep you on the path to your ambitions and goals, even when you don't feel like it. I want you to think of obligation as a container that allows for you to maintain relationships and community even when you don't feel like it. I want you to think of obligation as being able to stay the course even in the face of recognizing the limits of your physical body and your will, and accepting the possibility that obligation allows you to let go of expectation. It allows you to stop watching the pot to see if it's going to boil. It allows you to trust that you not knowing why or how does not keep a thing from happening. I want you to trust that your inability to do something or lack of knowledge or physical energy does not necessarily mean that a certain thing cannot happen. The Fool is here to offer to us the possibility that there is freedom in not knowing. There is freedom in not having to do it all yourself. There is freedom in the limits of your will. When your will is in full authority, it also is in full responsibility. And that's stressful. This last card, the Three of Wands, says, watch God work. Watch Goddess work. Right? It means watch time work. Watch the laws work. Right? Watch it work. I did a reading last week. And the message of that reading at the beginning of last week was, let your work speak for itself, or something like that. The cards were talking about, let your work catch up with you. So this Three of Wands, I think, is similar in that regard. Let your intention catch up with you. Put on a robe of faith that allows you to surrender and accept the limits of your physical body, your will, your intellect, to understand that you don't have to watch a plant in order for it to grow. So what are you growing? What are your ambitions? What are your obligations that you're feeling like, I don't feel like doing it, right? And how can you shift your perspective on those obligations to say, these obligations are the container that allow me to realize my intention. I cannot realize my intention without obligation. You're going to serve somebody or something. Are you going to serve the whims of your feelings? Or are you growing in wisdom and learning to discern when the feelings are leading you towards your intentions, or when your feelings are a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum because I don't want anybody to tell me what to do? Grow up. All right, let me just pull a couple cards here with the Dust to Onyx Tarot. Ten of Staffs. So Ten of Staffs is just like the Ten of Wands. This one is a little bit more empowering though, man. This Ten of Staffs in the Ducks to Onyx Tarot is the word that comes to me is overcoming. Um, um, there's a few hymns coming to me. How I got over, um, um, overcoming. How I got. Oh, I can't even think of the lyrics right now. But this Ten of Staffs is overcoming, overcoming. Uh, and subdue is a word associated with overcoming that I've used in some astrological concepts, but I see this overcoming. Hey, Milana, I see this overcoming as victory, as spiritual victory. Um, and there's a lot of imagery coming in my mind around the courage to stay the course, and to really not perceive setback, delay, or denial as a sign that you should not, right? But perceiving setback, delay, and denial as intention refining mechanisms. Thank you. When I got my nails done, I told my nail tech that I felt like Superwoman with these nails. All right, our one little card from the Dust to Onyx Tarot for this full moon is the Tower. The Tower. Let me just look and meditate on this card. This tower has a crown of jewels, a lot of fabric. Um, the tower in this particular deck um, is connecting back to this last row of cards here that I did with the Rider Waite Coleman Smith. Um, your story um, that you have been telling about a particular circumstance in your life has been rooted in and dependent upon your knowledge and your awareness. The tower offers an opportunity to just envision the possibility that there are things you don't know. And those things that you don't know are shaping your path forward. Those things that you don't know liberate you and give you the opportunity to tell a new story about who you are and what's happening in your life. Um, there's a few scriptures and things that are coming in my mind. And this scripture is always misquoted and misinterpreted and misappropriated. The scripture, all things work together for all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord, right? Totally just like misappropriated. But I want to say and reinterpret that to say all things are working for your good should you choose to tell that story. All things are working for my good when I open up my mind to the possibility that things are transpiring in my favor, even when I cannot perceive it. Now, this is not about you getting rich. This is not about you getting money. You can choose to tell that story if you want, good for you. But I just have to make it clear that this is not about that. This is about overcoming inner emotional conflicts. It is about honoring our spiritual and emotional inheritance to the point that we become standard bearers for the next generation. That means the willingness to tell the truth about what happened, the willingness to acknowledge that what happened has impacted my present, but also the willingness to press forward anyway. This Ten of Staffs and the Tower speaks of overcoming by telling new stories. The story of who you are, the story of how you became the way that you are, and the story about what's happening in your world, the story that's happening in your life, the story that's happening to you. This card, the part of this card that I just like can't stop staring at, and I haven't looked in the book, so I don't know what the artist's intention was, but I see this crown as wisdom, and I see like this portal here of something like something coming into conscious awareness, something coming into our minds that really change the way that we perceive the world around us. I always think of tower moments as like this particular story that you've been telling about yourself and this world is totally like, wow, that worked for you, but like you like something just comes in and blows your mind and makes you completely reinterpret everything, got you turning around looking back at things that have happened in your life, and you're like, whoa, so that's what that meant, that's why such and such did this and why I felt this way, that's what that feeling was, right? You're coming into some awareness that gives you spiritual power to overcome your inner emotional resistance, right? Trusting and feeling entitled enough to know that your ambitions are not just the consequence of your ego, but your ambitions are the bait that take you closer to who you're supposed to be. That's all I have to say about that. I think that we have done enough here. Just 1 hour. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm getting ready to post a coupon on Twitter and Instagram for my first time clients. I am offering 10% off your very first reading, a limited selection of readings, but I'm offering 10% off your very first reading with me, your first astrology reading. So make sure you're following me on Twitter, make sure you're following me on Instagram, and you will find this coupon code giving you 10% off for first time clients. Isn't that exciting? I am People's Oracle on both Twitter and Instagram. I always speak in sidereal, never tropical. So if you have not seen your sidereal birth chart, you can go to www.thepeoplesoracle.com and click sidereal birth chart from the menu, and it will show you instructions on how to cast your sidereal birth chart. I have got so many tools in my store to help you, learn how to use your sidereal birth chart. There is a gobob of free content on my Twitter account and on my blog. So if you have a question, search People's Oracle with your search topic on Twitter or on Google, and you will likely find that I've already had something to say about that. Thank you guys so much. Happy full moon. I will talk to you guys again soon. Bye.